Between the last two census, Nelson has grown stronger than any other part of New Zealand bar Auckland. I'll give you the exact numbers. Between the last two census, Auckland grew by 7.4%, Nelson grew by 7.1%. You know, you're arguing on the margins. And so my first point to you is we are a growing, successful region, but we need to make sure that we properly plan and accommodate for that growth going forward. I spend far too much of my political time dealing with the problems in Auckland, and at the core of them has been an inability of local government in Auckland to frankly get its crap sorted to be able to manage that growth. So if you look at the ridiculous house prices in Auckland and you ask what's been at the core of the problem is that the people living on the margins of Auckland on beautiful lifestyle blocks don't want to see urban sprawl and the meeting up where they've invested 10, 15 years of their life developing their little acre of paradise. So they use every tool they have in the book to both persuade the council and the Environment Court to block any growth. Simultaneously, there are other people that think that Auckland's answer is by intensification and more houses in the central city area, and the people in those leafy suburbs equally oppose with every tool in the book the growth, and as a consequence a city that needs 13,000 houses per year has been building about 4,000 per year, and economics is very simple. If there is restricted supply, strong demand, prices go nuts. And I only tell that story of what's going on in Auckland to challenge us about how we manage similar issues in our own city. Equally so when it's come to issues of transport. There's been some people that have wanted light rail in Auckland, some want electrified rail, some want motorways, and again, they've had an inability to get their act together. As a consequence, nothing happens, and the problem just progressively gets worse. And then it almost gets to the point where actually really something does have to happen, but then people get frustrated as the amount of time it takes to then be able to get onto the solutions, to get the land subdivided up, and to get the new houses and the new infrastructure built. So my first message to you is Nelson is growing, it is successful, and we need to do a better job of managing that growth. Can I give some areas where I think over the 25 years we've actually done very well? The work that is done by both our councils and the development of the Saxton Field complex is something of which our region should celebrate. There are some areas where our councils, the two of them, fight like cats and dogs, destructive to the region. On that one, they have done an exceedingly good job, and in my view that is one of the best sports facilities integrated together anywhere in the country, of which it just gives me great delight when I go down there for my son for cricket, and one day I counted up 900 cars down there and there was hardly room to move with over 1,800, 2,000 kids enjoying sport. That is the New Zealand, the way that we want it, and the council deserves credit for that. If I take one of my key areas of work, in which I think there is a big challenge for our district, it is in respect of water management. Let me give you a little bit of the national perspective and how it relates to us. Actually, New Zealand is more blessed with fresh water than any other country in the world. The United Nations publishes a list of the amount of fresh water per person. We have 145 million litres of water per person per year, which is enough for every one of us to have a full bath every 6 seconds, every minute of every day of our life. A hell of a lot of water. There's only one country in the world that's got more than 145. That's Iceland, and it's a bit harder to bath in ice. Now, if you look through in terms of Australia, there are 20. US, 14. UK, 2. China, 2. So my first lesson to you is actually New Zealand has abundant supplies of fresh water. We actually only use 1.7% of the rainwater that falls on New Zealand and all the uses that occur around irrigation and town water supplies and industry and all those things. But there's a problem. We've had so much fresh water that we've been a bit careless and slam dunk about the way in which we've managed it. And we've got a real challenge as a country to improve the way we do it. The area where it is most acute in Canterbury is Canterbury, and let me tell you what's at the core of the problem. If you are a farmer in Canterbury and you want to irrigate, the cheapest thing is to ring the drilling company up, whack a hole down into the aquifer, suck the water up, and to irrigate. Problem? Of the water that falls in New Zealand, only 4% of it goes into the aquifer. Yet, our irrigation is 70% taken out of the aquifers. Now, take the Canterbury example again. 1 day's peak flow of the Waimak River is enough to irrigate Canterbury for the whole year. 1 day's peak flow of the Waimak is enough to irrigate all of Canterbury. And so at the core of what we need to do is to shift the demand that we're placing on water on the aquifer that's having flow-on effects where insufficient water is going into Lake Ellesmere, which is a bloody toxic mess, and taking more of the water and storing it from those big rivers and then distributing it. That's more expensive, but it's what we have to do if we're serious about the environmental impacts. Now, as a consequence, and as Minister for the Environment in 2011, we set a box of minimum standards across the country about minimum flows in rivers and minimum water quality standards. And they are starting to bite around the country and are at the core of the issues and challenges for the Tasman District Council and for the issues around the Waimea River. In heart, the Waimea River, particularly during low flow periods, ends up in a toxic mess. Why? Because they suck so much water out of the river in terms of getting very, very small flows, and as a consequence, the concentration of nutrients becomes very high. You've got small volume, large amount of nutrients, algae blooms, to the point where if you take dogs down there, and there have been a number of cases, they die in the river. And that is unacceptable. And so what the government has said, here's national rules, you need to comply with them. Tasman District Council does the numbers, and they come through and they say, actually, the amount of water that we're draining out of the Waimea Plains is 63% above what is long-term sustainable to meet the national minimum limits. So, you've got to effectively reduce everybody's water take by 63%, or you reduce by some by 80% and others by 40%, you know? And there is a looming scrap going on about, well, who gets it? Now you might say, well, what the heck's this got to do with Nelson? I'll tell you why it's got something to do with Nelson. 40% of Nelson's current town water supply comes from the Roding. The Roding is part of the Waimea catchment. The resource consent for that water take comes up for renewal this year. You can expect to see the orchardists and the farmers on the Waimea Plains challenging Nelson City and saying, hang on a moment, and this has actually occurred and got right up my nostrils, is that at times when our farmers on the Waimea Plains have been under enormous pressure for water and have had their takes reduced, the same time the Maitai Dam has been full, and the Nelson City Council has been taking its water supply out of the Roding, which ultimately could have been used by the farmers in the Waimea, and that does not make sense. So we need to take a regional perspective around it, and we need to move it through. Why do I strongly support the Waimea Community Dam? I do because enabling us to store those very high winter flows and then distribute them during the summer when water is under high demand is absolutely crucial to the horticultural sector, which is at the heart of Nelson's success story. I spent Friday, and I'm spending a day a month in different industries just to refamiliarise myself with those industries. I have to tell you, 2.5 hours of picking apples in the hot sun. I was pretty buggered, and I think if I didn't leave I was going to get fired anyway for lack of performance. Spent some time at Ewers, which employs nearly 200 people and is one of the biggest vegetable growing sites anywhere in New Zealand. And all of those businesses are vitally dependent on that water. Now, two bits are put up as to say, oh, we don't need to spend the $70 million on the dam. All we need to do is to each in our houses, people say, is put some stormwater tanks. Well, let me give you the numbers. I'm building a house at the moment, got too many teenage kids fighting over the shower, and got a quote. For me to put storage tanks for my stormwater in my house would cost me $2,800. If you look at it a per cubic metre price, the amount of cost of that water is 50 times as much as the cost per cubic metre for the Waimea Dam. 50 times as much. And when I read letters to the editor of people saying, don't build the dam, all we need to do is to put storage tanks in our houses, I'm sorry, they are on the wrong planet. The numbers do not stack up. It is an economic nonsense. That is, water storage is a business that is very orientated around scale. That is, as you do it bigger, it becomes a lot less cost per cubic metre to be able to do it. And then the second line I hear is, all we need to do is to build some weirs. We just put some weirs along the Waimea River. That will somehow solve the problem. I tell you the truth. When you build a weir, it's good for the farmer that's right next door to it. You solve his problem, for sure. But you rob the farmer downstream of his existing water. All you're doing is shifting the chairs on the Titanic. You're not fundamentally increasing the amount of water that can get there. So the big challenge for our community over the next couple of years is going to be, how do we find a solution for funding that $70 million of infrastructure? And the first point I make about this is that we are huge benefactors of the infrastructure that has been built by previous generations. Go back and read the Nelson Mail. At the time our city forefathers put the cup in the port, there was a rampant argument over the huge cost that people of this city put their hands to do at that time. And those brave forefathers of our city made exactly the right call, and the port would not exist, and this town would not be the buoyant, fantastic place that it is if they'd not made that call. And you can repeat that story of whether it's the Nelson Cut, whether it's drainage schemes, whether it's dams, whether it's roads, and all those infrastructure that every day we in Nelson take for granted, and we owe it in the same way of which they put their hands in their pocket to build infrastructure for us. We owe it to the next generation to build the infrastructure so that our kids and their kids can have a prosperous future in our town. Now, the government's prepared to be part of it. I understand 70 million's a big call. Here's the really difficult part. There's no difficulty in saying they'll stretch and there will be some grizzles. That those rural landowners on the Waimea Plains are going to need to put their hand in their pocket to pay for the water of the Waimea Dam that's for their use. But here's the hard part. Who pays for the water to increase the minimum flows in the Waimea River? Currently they go down to just 200 litres a second. The new minimum standards require that to be 1,200 litres per second. Who pays for the storage of the water for that environmental benefit? Who pays for the water to manage the future urban growth that we know both Nelson and Richmond are going to have over future years? Now, I'm not going to tell you there's some perfect answer. I'm doing my damnedest at central government end to try and screw as much money out of that system to help towards it. We've specifically set up the Crown Irrigation Investment Fund to be part of that. One of the suggestions I have made is that for the port company to make a special dividend, say of $8 million to both councils, and then to allow that special dividend to then be passed on from the council to the investment for that infrastructure. Why do I think that makes some sense? Well, actually 95% of the goods that go across that wharf of Nelson come from Tasman, first. Second is that if the dam does not go ahead, we are likely to see somewhere about a 30% reduction in horticultural production from our region, and that will be less future revenues that both councils will be able to get from the port. And thirdly, it feeds into that idea of mine which says it is perfectly logical for a community, just as it is for a business or an individual, to use your assets that you currently have to leverage and use that to be able to build the next asset that you require for your community to go. So I flag that as a major infrastructure issue. It will be challenging for councils as they work it through. The last point I'd make to you is the business at Ewers that I visited on Friday afternoon. Fantastic business that employs about 200 people. 150 of those staff are refugees. You may note there's quite a debate about refugees, and some people are saying the government should take more. My view is that the success or failure of a story for refugees is so connected as to whether you're able to find them work. And as the manager of Ewers said, if the dam does not go ahead, you can kiss goodbye to those 200 jobs that is Ewers, because water is at the core of that business and for the jobs for those first generation of refugees who are such an essential part of that business. And my challenge to our community is to connect the dots. The second infrastructure issue that I want to talk about a little bit is a tad controversial, strong different views, but let me give you my penny's worth. And that is in respect of the debate that we are going to have as a community this year around the Southern Link Road and Rocks Road. There were three important steps along the government's policy at the last election to make further progress on the state highway link to Nelson City. And they were, firstly, there was a block of funding called R funding that was set aside at the time that fuel taxes were put up. That money had to be spent by the middle of 2018. The NZTA board has said in Nelson's case, it makes good sense for us to hold that money to one side until the study and the work on the Southern Link Road and the cycleway is completed. Why is that good news? Because the hardest hurdle in getting that project done is going to be the issue of funding. The second successful step last year was a commitment of $14 million of government money towards the cycleway and walkway around Rocks Road. That is a massive commitment. At the last election, we set aside $100 million for the whole country for urban cycleways. You'll know some of the rural cycleways are already done. Put $100 million aside. I roughly work out, whenever the government announces funds, Nelson's 1/50th of New Zealand's population, and my aim is to try and get at least 2%, because that's 1/50th. For us to get 12 million out of 100 million, I'm sorry, we'll hit the jackpot. Bloody good job. Bank it. Let's put it there because it's a real opportunity. Third step was the strategic study that NZTA concluded last year, saying that the strategic case for the Southern Link in respect of safety, the economy, the environment, stacked up well for it to proceed, and this year they're now moving on to the business case. Can I tell you the biggest problem for the opponents of the Southern Link, and I will be prodding those council candidates during the course of this year, and that is, fair enough to oppose the Southern Link, what's your alternative? Righto? Because, in my view, I actually find it very easy to win the argument the region's growing. I'm sorry, you can't deny the fact that we've gone from 70,000 to 100,000 people. You know, the interesting thing is, the number of vehicles in the region has actually gone from 50,000 to 101,000. The number of miles that is travelled has gone up. As people become better off, there's more people that are in Motueka that want to come to the rugby and to the arts and to work here and do all those things. So there's a lot more people moving around. You can't deny that. And the reason I want to challenge those people who don't want this project to proceed as to what their alternative is because I've never experienced a perfect project in my life. Right? I'm sorry, there is nothing that you do in politics that's absolutely perfect. There's always going to be some ups and some downside. If you're going to spend your political career, Tim, in council or in government, trying to please absolutely everybody, I'll guarantee at the end of it you'll achieve pleasing absolutely nobody. You'll never do anything. And so the key thing for me is, whether it's the proposals for light rail, whether it's the proposals for trains, whether it's the proposals for barging logs from the Waimea Inlet, or whether it's in terms of that everybody can move around in buses, I'm sorry, they are not credible. And in my view, we help focus the minds of the community when we actually say, well, what is? Okay, Nick's been up front. He says that's what his way and vision forward for the region. What is your alternative? And my view is that is going to be a key part of the debate. In terms of the bits that do stack up really well, Look, when you're building roads, the answer has got to be that I very strongly subscribe to the view that all citizens are equal. And the key objective has got to be nobody wants the heavy traffic past their house. So the objective as a community leader has got to be, where will the road go that will go past the least number of houses? And if you look at the alternatives of Rocks Road, of Waimea Road, or the Southern Link route, there is an 80% reduction in the number of houses that are directly fronting. And it is my view longer term. In fact, my most interesting experience at the last general election, when I was door knocking in St Vincent Street, was the number of homeowners who said to me, Nick, can you get your arse on with it? The real estate agents have told me that when you put that road through, I'm going to be able to sell my the house at a good value, that it'll have commercial value, and I'll be able to get myself a nicer house in another part of the suburbs. The last part I want to do is to link the story around our roading infrastructure need with the broader issue around housing. If I look at that broad data around how Nelson has changed over the 25 years, if I look at life expectancy, it's gone up by 5 years in Nelson during the period I've been MP. That's a good thing. People are living longer, they're healthier. If I look in terms of child immunisation rates, they've got a hell of a lot better. If I look at early childhood education, primary education, secondary education, it's all got better. The one stat that has got worse over those 25 years is home ownership. And it matters. In my view, and I'll give you an example which is of interest, Kevin, to the Residents Association, if people own their own home, the stats show they're twice as likely to vote in the local body election. Why? Well, if you're signing out that rates bill, you've got a bit more interest in who you're going to entrust to spend it over the next year. In my view, home ownership is a really important glue for keeping a community together and to having an interest in the state of the playground, the tidiness of our town, making sure the town's going ahead. And we need to do more to make sure that more Nelsonians, average income earners, lower income earners, are able to have that stability of owning their own home. So that means, and if you look at Nelson, let's be honest, where are the new homes that are going to be built that are going to be affordable for our moderate income earners? I'm sorry, it's not going to be Atafai. It's not going to be the Port Hills. But we have got large blocks of land, particularly in the Nelson South Waimea Hills area, that currently is blocked from development as a consequence of not having our roading act together. In other words, the Nelson City Council has been saying we can't put new intersections onto Waimea Road because it's right at the peak of its transport capacity, and that means that that area that you drive past every time you come across the Waimea Hill, that's got the capacity for about 2,000 homes, cannot be developed. There's a retirement village that's gone ahead at the moment, and that's a step in the right direction, but we actually need to resolve those housing issues, and that's one of the things that I'm hoping to put through Cabinet on Monday around the special housing areas so that we can get on and get those approved. But you have to understand the link with the transport issue, because if you just feed more traffic onto those areas, you're just going to congest and compound the problem. You need to manage the growth in a coordinated way. Thank you for your patience in listening. I've tried to give you a few perspectives on issues of infrastructure. I'm a raving optimist for the benefits that this town has. I genuinely believe that we live in one of the best, very best countries and in the very best city in this country, and a privilege to do so. But that privilege carries it with responsibilities. By you being active members of the Residents Association is accepting some of that civic responsibility of being part of continuing to make this the best little place on earth to live. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Nick is prepared to take questions. There'll be no political pontification. I will stop you in the middle of it.
Does that apply to me too?
Just remember, it's a Nelson issue that we are mainly interested in.
Mary Ellen, I'll get you just to stand back.
Yeah,
with the
sorry.
next lady here.
Is it Mary Ellen?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Nick, for your talk. Just picking up on the theme of accommodating growth, I guess.
Yeah.
And for me, the whole question of rental housing, and you and I have spoken about this already, and Nelson is in very poor shape. And just last week, myself, from the Voice Nelson Nelson, myself and Hilary Mitchell went along to council and spoke about the idea of Nelson being part of a warranted fitness trial, which is being funded by Healthcare New Zealand. Wellington Council and Dunedin Council are already on board as part of this trial, and we were talking to the Nelson City Council about the possibility of Nelson also getting on board for this. Now, as Minister of Housing, I guess I want to ask you whether you would get behind this idea of Nelson being part of a warranted fitness trial.
Fair question, simple answer, direct answer, no, I'm opposed to warranted fitness. And I don't think the economics of our warranted fitness housing stacks up. Done quite a lot of work on it over 3 years. And let me tell you exactly why. As an aside, the point you raised at the beginning is absolutely right. Give you an example. Constituent came to see me at my caravan on Saturday. He's just moved from Queenstown. Him and his family, he's a helicopter pilot, he's actually on good income. The house that he was living in, he showed me photos of them in that Queenstown area, and they are atrocious. Why are they able to get away with it? What's at the core of the problem? The core of the problem is in Queenstown, the NIMBYs have stopped any new houses being built. I actually went to a hearing in Queenstown in which there was arguments for new houses to be built, and the submitters said, we don't want any more houses being built in our area around Arrowtown unless they've got a value of more than $2 million, because we only want nice people living here. And when I challenged him and I said, well, who's going to make your cappuccino for you and when you're down at your golf club, he said, well, they can drive from Cromwell. I'm sorry, that stuff's wrong. And if you ask, fundamentally the argument around housing is around actually growing the supply and the affordability and that discussion. Now, can I come specifically to the issue of warrant of fitness? The problem with the warrant of fitness is the huge compliance cost that ultimately will be passed on to the tenant. The thing you've got to understand in the business of government is that if I impose a cost on a supermarket, or I impose a cost on a landlord, or I impose a cost on a contractor that's providing services, they don't pay, they pass the cost on to the consumer. And so the reason that I am opposed to a housing warrant of fitness where every house has to be inspected and go through a checklist of everything associated with it, is that the cost-benefit analysis does not stack up. Now, I'm not saying there's not a problem, I'm saying I've got a better solution.
Well, I don't, yeah, I mean, okay.
But-
I don't think you have got a better solution. I mean, those sort of...
But I would like,
stuff,
you've answered the
are laid
question.
on restaurants, for example.
Yeah.
You know, anyone that runs a business basically has to go through a series of compliance hoops to sign off and
That's
say,
right.
yeah, you're a member of this association or whatever. And it seems to me that increasingly landlords are going to have to do that because
Well, I don't-
you and I have walked through number 78 Vanguard Street
Mm-hmm.
together, and you know the state, and
That's
a
where you
bad
need to,
one.
you
I'm
need to
not-
let me finish my answer, because I've got a bill before Parliament that is addressing 3 parts. And I think before you go down the road of a warrant of fitness, and the council imposing huge compliance costs across the vast bulk of houses, of where it's not an issue, because there is a cost, it's an extra bureaucracy, then you need to say, well, will the alternative work? What's my alternative? One is, it is a no-brainer that we do not require landlords to put smoke alarms in houses. And so from the 1st of July this year, the bill I have before the House makes smoke alarms compulsory. The second part is to make both ceiling and underfloor insulation compulsory, phased in over a period of 3 years, and my estimate is there's about 180,000 houses. Now, the issue that you're really focused on is the slum landlord. And if we went to that property that I visited with you, it breached the law now, right? Absolutely breaches the law now. The problem is the enforcement. And let me just, because it is an important issue that you need to understand what I'm doing in this area of law. At the moment, the only person who can enforce a tenancy law is the tenant, right? So if I'm leasing a house off Peter and the house is a dive, the only person that can enforce the law against Peter is me as the tenant taking an action in the tenancy tribunal. Now, my view is that where you are right is that there is a small proportion of slum landlords who rent to our most risk group of community, and we actually need to have a public agency enforcing the minimum standards we have now. It's equivalent to the employment law, where generally if you are an employer, you only face the law from your employee, except if it's a blatant breach of your holiday pay or your minimum wage act, the department, what was Labor, now MB, prosecutes you. And my view of that bill, of having a focused approach and funding and informing tenants and by ministry to go after those small number of landlords that are really in trouble, is a far more effective way of resolving this issue of those relatively small number of slums than complying a warrant of fitness over 500,000 houses in New Zealand.
All right,
Can I
thank you.
just say, that tenant, that one that this is very much a Nelson issue now.
Yeah.
As you say, the tenant has the power to take the land. Tenants' lives are often difficult.
That's right, I accept that.
And now that very one, is being taken to the tenancy tribunal by the landlord's agent. That very one, she's been taken over some little bit or other.
Sure.
So it's like the power dynamics, Nick, are just so odd, they're so unbalanced that
Well,
we actually expect
my
the
bill's,
tenant to
my
follow
bill's
through
before the
to-
select committee. I provided you a copy of it. I think that bill is a substantive step forward, but I've got to tell you, and this may be a philosophical difference, my view is government needs to be careful of applying red tape, and councils equally so, and doing it in a very targeted way so it addresses the problem and minimise the burden.